And we are back on the 0 Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and once again we are recording, not broadcasting, but recording here at Netroots Nation, which is being held this year in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I'm holding in my hand what looks to be a very good book from the executive vice president of an organization I appreciate a lot named Democracy Collective, and that's the name of the organization. And Marjorie Kelly is, as I say, executive vice president and senior fellow there, and with Ted Howard, who is the co-founder and president of the Democracy Collaborative. She has written this book. Did I say Democracy Collective the first time? Because if I did, I got it wrong. Right. Democracy Collaborative. This book is called The Making of a Democratic Economy, Building Prosperity for the Many, Not the Few. And if that doesn't sound good enough, it has a foreword by Naomi Klein. So that should let you know, if you're a Naomi Klein fan, that it's A-okay. So first of all, Marjorie, thank you for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks, Richard.
Secondly, what was the inspiration for the writing of this book?
The inspiration is that we are in deep, deep trouble. And the system that we have, and by that we mean the economic system, is actually producing the troubles that we're having, whether it's unemployment and stagnant wages and the inability to deal with climate change and the capture of government by moneyed interests. That all goes back to the design of our economic system, which is all about making more money for those who have money. And it's a capitalist system. It's built on promoting capital. And so we need a new system. And we need to get serious about looking at what is that next system. People say socialism, capitalism.
Right.
And what we're saying is, the choice is not binary. Those are 19th century concepts. We need a new kind of concept, an economy that's designed from the inside out for broad prosperity.
So, okay, I get that it's not binary, and in fact, if we talk about socialism versus capitalism, there's virtually no system on earth, even the most communist ones, that aren't somewhere on a spectrum or a Likert scale or something of left versus right. Mm-hmm. But when you say we need an entirely new system, that suggests to me that none of those models is exactly right for what you're describing.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so what we do in this book, Richard, is we go around and we visit the places where this new kind of economy is coming up. We look at the worker-centered company of Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx. It's
that's over 12. The home health care?
Yeah, home health care. These are low-income women, mostly Latina, African-American women, out there helping the elderly and the disabled in their homes. And they own this company. And it's a company that's around their benefit. It's trying to benefit them in every way that it can. That's a different kind of dream than just trying to sort of wrap around regulations that companies keep evading by going overseas or fighting unions. Let's get workers right at the very center of companies. That's one example of a democratic economy.
Well, that would be an example that I think a lot of, just thinking out loud here, that a lot, for example, Marxists or socialists might embrace, because you're eliminating what they call the rentier class, right? You're eliminating the people who make money without doing the work, and that surplus value of capital, of labor, goes directly to the workers. So that's a good model. In my view, makes a lot of sense. What are some others that you think?
Yeah, well,
and I've got your book here if you want to refer to it. Yeah.
I think what you want is an economy where labor comes before capital. You don't need to eliminate capital. Sexism didn't eliminate men.
No,
what I mean?
They're working
when we had feminism.
Yeah, right.
No, what you just need to get the power relations right. But let's talk about, for example, impact investing or ethical finance. You can still have investing, but it needs to have a social, ecological aim at its core, right alongside financial returns. And that also is a growing movement, where you can look at community-owned, state-owned banks. For example, Bank of North Dakota is owned by the people of that state. It's a century old. It supports a whole network of community-owned banks, and it helped that state weather the 2008 downturn. There's a movement now for for state-owned banks, city-owned banks. So that's another example. These are institutions that have the common good at their core. That's what we need.
So, and again, we're talking with Marjorie Kelly, who is Executive Vice President of the Democracy Collaborative.
Right.
And co-author of The Making of a Democratic Economy. It's always, or it seemed to me for a long time, that when we talk about two groups of people, workers and investors, let's say, that's really not, there are more groups than that. There are the investors, within investors, there are the investors who invest in the economy through business. You know, they build hotels or or factories or whatever. And then you have the investors who invest in investment. You have this sort, you have this sort of, it's like building on clouds or something from a real world point of view, but you have the financialization of the economy. You have, so you know, for example, you mentioned a public bank, a state bank, the Bank of North Dakota. What do you think of a model that says, and I'm just thinking out loud here, that investment in the economy should be treated differently by society, investment in the real world, let's say, for lack of a better description,
I think that's right.
should be treated differently than investment in Puerto Rican foreclosures, or following Hurricane Marina, or bundled bundled derivatives, mortgage-backed securities, whatever. What do you think about distinguishing those in the public mind in order to say perhaps one should be treated differently than the other?
You know, I think that you're right, Richard, to draw a line between the kind of investments that we want and those that we don't want. What I would say is we draw the line, we say investments ought to have a positive impact. They ought to be investments in real things, you're right, I mean, and not just investments in speculation. It's very difficult today. If you and I happen to have a little bit of money set aside in a 401k, it's very hard to invest that locally. I mean, isn't that nutty?
Right.
I can't invest in a business next door to me, but I can invest in Wall Street, where it's just speculative trading and who knows where it's going. So yes, I think local investing is one of the things that we need to build on. And one of the things we talk about in the book, for example, there's a new fund for employee ownership that our organization has helped design in Cleveland. And it's investing in buying companies. You know, you have founders who want to get out, they want to retire. So it'll buy the companies, it'll convert them to employee ownership and support them in the long run. So it's a way that investors, we can put our money to good use, creating the kind of economy that we want. That's very different than just staying in the speculative market.
So is that do you envision a situation where, for example, you mentioned 401ks, where I could invest my 401k in a fund that only helped employees set up their own ownership plans for corporations?
Ideally, you know, we're not there yet, but yeah, we ought to get there. Or a fund that only invests in your city.
Right.
We need those kind of options for investors, and we don't have nearly enough of them.
Well, my city is Washington, which raises all sorts of other complexities in terms of investment. But having said that, so where do you see clearly investment, ownership, and so on are half the equation, but when you're talking about workers and worker involvement, the other is actual decision making. You know, we've had ESOPs and other types of programs for employees that give them a certain, usually pretty small, I believe, stake in the corporation they work for, but without much power to influence the outcome of that corporation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Richard. So we like to talk about democratic companies, and that means a couple different things. It means broad-based ownership, so the ownership ought to be held by ordinary people. There ought to be a public purpose at the core of that company, and there ought to be employee voice in decision making. And different companies do it different ways. But Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx, that's a worker cooperative. Workers get to vote for seats on the board. But what I'm told, even more important than that, is they have a culture of engagement, a culture of empowerment. They have a labor management committee where they can resolve conflicts. This is a unionized company, so it's not only worker-owned, it's also unionized. So there are multiple avenues for worker voice. And I think that's a model of what we want.
And I couldn't agree more. And again, we're talking with Marjorie Kelly, Executive Vice President of the Democracy Collaborative. And so you also talk in the book, I'm sort of intrigued by the idea that the principle, I guess that's what you mean by the principle of place, isn't it? That somehow a relocalization of the economy, I mean, that's my own phrase, but is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
A sense that if I live and work here in Philadelphia, for example, I should have the ability to make whatever small investments I can make and whatever investments I may make collectively as a member of a union or whatever, more attuned to my community, more locked into my community.
Well, I think
What's
that's
the thinking there?
well, I think that's right, Richard. We want to bring the economy back to earth. I think that's what we need to do. It's up there in the speculative realm. It's companies roaming the globe looking for the best place to extract their next dime. That's kind of nutty. I mean, people, houses, families, communities, we all live someplace local. That's where actual human life resides, is on the earth, in real places. And so we need to bring, so local purchasing, local investing, those are ways to bring it back to earth. So place, that's one of the principles. Another is inclusion. We need economic activity that deliberately includes people of color. You know, the current economy has been built on their backs. So how do you bring concern for people of color into economic development, for example? Also sustainability, ecological sustainability. How would we put ecological sustainability at the very core of the economy? Well, one example, I mean, why can we not deal with climate change? Because ExxonMobil and the like are there controlling the political process, introducing confusion. Well, why don't we just buy them out? Why don't we just go in and buy out the 25 largest fossil fuel companies, buy 51% and wind them down? This is one of the ideas we talk about in the book. And you use the power of the Federal Reserve to do it, the same power that bailed out the big banks. I mean,
so let me imagine that for a second.
Okay.
Because I like the winding down part. I don't like the writing those bastards a check part. But obviously, you know, other than like seizure, which would create civil war, you'd have to do that. Who exactly would do that? Would it be the federal government? And if so, how?
Yeah, we have a program that we call Quantitative Easing for the Planet. You know, QE for the planet, and you know, it's been funded. There are some people excited about it. And, you know, the idea is the Federal Reserve can issue new money in the same way that it issued new money to bail out the big banks. I mean, Hank Paulson got down on his knees and got $700 billion from Nancy Pelosi to bail out the big banks, right? We estimated it would take about $700 billion, oddly the same number, to buy 51% of the 25 largest fossil fuel companies. And so it wouldn't come out of taxpayers' dollars. It'd be new money, and it's the
How
idea.
so? Where would it come from?
Well, the same place. Quantitative easing comes from the same place that the money came from to bail out the big banks. The Federal Reserve basically just writes up their account. Says, well, now you've got $700 billion there. So it's new money that comes into existence.
Okay. All right. No, I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, it's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But yes, I am with you. So, and by the way, the term that I came up with and never used, but kind of liked, was qualitative easing.
Oh, there you go.
As opposed to quantitative, not just a mass infusion, but selectively chosen for goals, social goals that you want to, right? That you want to, and that's what you're talking about. I think that makes a lot of sense too. I guess in closing, Marjorie Kelly, just in kind of as a concluding theme, last act of this conversation, it seemed, how do we get there from here though? I mean, here you have a group of people embracing socialism because it's a red flag that has flown many times in history and seems to be flying again. You have a group of people embracing capitalism, but we're talking about, I don't want to use this term third way because that phrase has become toxic, but we're talking about a synthesis in effect.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
So how would we develop the political momentum to make So, like the idea of buying up the fossil fuel companies to me is brilliant. It's
Sure.
great. But how do we develop the political momentum to make that happen? What's the flag people march on?
Yeah. I think it's the democratic economy. I think it's about building community wealth. And in the book, we talk about how would you build political power around this movement? It's actually happening in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party there, Jeremy Corbyn, was predicted to be trounced in the election a few years ago. In fact, he came out with 40% of the vote, just behind the Conservatives at 42%, which surprised everyone. And he is talking about a democratic economy. He is talking about Preston, the Preston model, which is inspired by our work in Cleveland. And it's all about relocalizing the economy. It's about building community wealth. It's about keeping wealth and money circulating locally. It's about pension funds and the big county government and spending their money locally. That city, Preston, has been deemed the most improved city in the UK. It has lower unemployment. It has better wages. They created a living wage for the city. So that's an example. And there is a whole movement forming around labor and around the Preston model, which is 60 cities have come forward and said, we want to do what you do. So that's an example of how you can build a political movement around this kind of work.
And so, as a political movement, it would be, to a certain extent, national, but it sounds to me as if municipal action would be a key part of it,
Yeah,
too.
it's all of it. It's all of it, Richard, because
Right.
the economy lives all kinds of places.
Okay, well, the book is I'm very much looking forward to reading it. It is The Making of a Democratic Economy, Building Prosperity for the Many, Not Just a Few. That's your Jeremy Corbyn reference right there. And it is by Ted Howard and my guest, Marjorie Kelly, who is the Executive Vice President and co-founder, right, of the, are you co-founder?
No, I'm a senior fellow and
Senior
Vice
senior
President.
fellow, and I'm getting it all wrong. It's all this noise out here.
I know, it's a lot.
Of the Democracy Collaborative, but I got that right this time, didn't I?
Thank you for having me, Richard. This is fun.
It's a pleasure.